Good evening and welcome to our webinar on energy democracy. Thank you all for joining. So firstly, we have Cliona Sharkey here from Trócaire. Cliona is here to show us the work that Trócaire does in communities all over the world that are the front lines of climate change and resource extraction. Thanks, Cliona.
Typhoon to make landfall. You'll remember Typhoon Haiyan. And then the bottom right-hand corner is Doyola, internally displaced persons camp in Somalia. And some of you will be aware that often in these parts of the world where there's really complex, protracted crises involving conflict and things like that, there are also these climate-related factors underlying the conflict and displacement. Move on. Moving on from climate justice, I suppose, as Kate mentioned, there's so many aspects to the idea of climate justice and the idea of looking at energy and the energy sector transition is a huge one in terms of the rights of and the need for protection of workers as certain sectors are transitioned out, and they need to ensure that new jobs are robust and rights-based, and that there's the ability to unionize and all those things. So there's so many levels to the climate justice imperative. Two of the things I suppose that particularly concern the work that we do as Trócaire would be obviously the overall issue of ambition, ensuring that we do enough quickly enough as Ireland according to our responsibility and the emissions that we have here in Ireland, that we are doing enough. Another thing about climate justice is the how we take action. So what kind of policy we're doing here, what kind of investment decisions are being made, and what impact that has on people in developing countries. So I'll come back to that later on. So on to the energy aspect. So I wanted to give you some flavour of the global energy picture. Now, this is not my background, so I relied on the UN for these stats. So globally, 9 out of 10 people worldwide have access to electricity. So that sounds pretty good, you would think, but actually behind that figure is the other side of the picture. So within that, 3 billion people, in that context, 3 billion people still lack access to clean cooking fuels and technology. And that's not clean cooking fuels in a kitchen as we know it. That's having an indoor stove in which you're doing all your cooking, all your heating of water in an informal settlement where all that that smoky fuel is in your living space, affecting your health. 87 million of the 840 million, so 840 million do not have access to electricity, and the vast majority of them live in rural areas. So this is, I think, an interesting parallel for some of the discussions here about energy democracy and that idea of decentralization and local ownership. So in this context of it, it's clear that like we're in an energy transition, but actually there's a huge swathe of people in the world who currently don't have access to electricity, never mind to the modern clean renewable energy that is needed. So some of you will be familiar, I'm sure, with the Sustainable Development Goals, and one of those goals is Goal 7 around affordable and clean energy. So there is a goal that by 2030 to ensure access to affordable, reliable, sustainable and modern energy for all. So alongside our global climate commitments, there are these commitments related to social and economic development, including access to energy. And the Sustainable Development Goals, as you might know, are relevant to all countries, not just developing countries. So looking at the commitments for developed countries can be of use and interest in work at the national level here. The other thing that's important to point out is that we know we need to make the big transition, and at this point only 17.5% of total final energy consumption comes from renewable energy, and that's a stat from the UN from 2019. So we know that is needs to and will change over the next years, but how it will change is obviously a key question: how quickly it will change and how it will change. So this is where I want to highlight to you some of the risks and opportunities in this transition, this global climate and energy transition. This is something that as a development and justice organization, we would be particularly concerned with. So according to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the report they put out in 2018, it is possible to meet the limit to warming of 1.5. And it is actually possible to do so in a way that also aligns with the Sustainable Development Goals. So we can go through this climate and energy transition in a way that also tackles social and economic poverty and inequality, or we can do so in a way that actually exacerbates those issues. So depending on how we go about these transitions, we can either realize synergies, or we can realize trade-offs, so see negative impacts on social and economic poverty and inequality. So now I'm going to turn to Xian and ask her to put on the video for us. So Trócaire, just to explain before it starts, because I suppose as a development organization, we're looking globally at the prospects of this energy transition and at the opportunities, but also the risks to people on the ground. So this video we're showing you is part of our new campaign on corporate accountability, to try and make sure that people who are trying to live sustainably at the local level and protect their environment can do so without being tackled by large corporates. Okay, I let you watch the video and I can continue after.
You can see the screen, okay?
I can't view it yet.
Para mí es como un compromiso en el que entendemos que pues nuestra vida está ligada a procesos más grandes, a una historia, a una lucha colectiva, y que pues para nosotros no hay más camino que la justicia y la dignificación de los pueblos.
Solidarizarnos, ¿verdad?, con los que se han convertido en mártires por defender la naturaleza, por defender los bienes, nuestros bienes comunes, y que las empresas transnacionales, con tal de adquirir lo material, lo económico, no se dan cuenta que cada árbol que corten en el mundo, que cada río que se seque en el mundo, es un bien natural que nos afecta a todos, a todos. Vemos pues las consecuencias del cambio climático, aunque Don Trump no crea en él, ¿verdad? Bueno, ahí estamos pues apoyándonos, y esa solidaridad de todo el pueblo de Honduras y sobre todo del pueblo internacional, de las rebeldías del mundo, nos han hecho pues superar esto. Y
I go back to share my screen, I think, is that right?
Yeah.
So thank you for your patience, everyone. I hope you got something from that video, and some of you might be wondering what's this connection with energy democracy then? And I'm still trying to change my screen now. So I suppose how this connects with this idea of the energy transition is that attacks on human rights defenders. So human rights defenders essentially means civil society activists. In the NGO community, we call them human rights defenders, people who are acting on the ground to defend human rights or environmental rights. Them being attacked and subjected to harassment and abuse by corporations and indeed governments is not new. But what is new is the fact that it is increasing. And the other and most concerning thing is that it is likely that given this huge energy transition that we have to see globally, how this is going to change investment and policy trends and things like that, there's a risk that there's going to be a significant dramatic increase across the world in competition for land, for resources, for the building of mega projects and things like that. That could have a disastrous impact on these very front lines of the climate and energy transition. So I finally managed to change my slide. That's just some facts and stats for you. So the increasing demand for renewable energy is putting additional demands on land. 13% of documented attacks on human rights defenders in 2018 were related to renewable energy, and 47 cases in 2019. And you'll see in the video and also in our reports, our policy reports in this area, we draw particular attention to women. This is because, as in all areas, women are particularly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. And they also experience particular abuses and forms of harassment as human rights defenders because of their gender. And yet they're showing incredible leadership at the local levels in terms of innovation, but also the courage in terms of challenging these corporations. And you'll see at the bottom there the different types of harassment. So in some cases, violence and even murder, and in other cases then it's judicial harassment, so bringing of criminal proceedings. Go to the last one. So just stepping back and reflecting on these connections, connecting the global and the local. I suppose in terms of energy justice and the facing into this transition, it's clear that all energy policy and investment decisions need to be challenged. So there is simply no room for any more investment in the continuation and expansion of fossil fuels. We know that the reserves of fossil fuels held by companies and governments is already well more than is aligned with the carbon budgets for the global climate goals. And yet we know that over the last years and also in the current context that these companies we're looking for support, looking for continued policy and investment support, and even in the current crisis, we'll be looking for economic support because of the impacts on their business because of the COVID crisis. And then ambition and solidarity. So of course we need to demand greater ambition at all levels, and to focus in our demands both for ambition and solidarity. So in the context of the energy transition, particularly here also at the domestic level, really conscious of people who are experiencing energy poverty in Ireland and the people who will be affected in terms of their jobs and their communities in the transition, and connecting that then to the global justice dimension. So ambition in that we need to protect the most vulnerable people and countries from the worst impacts, and solidarity in that we do not make policy and investment decisions, whether in relation to fossil fuels or renewables, that are actually going to have detrimental impacts on the people on the front lines. And then finally on corporate accountability, Trócaire has a campaign now on campaigning for Ireland to support the UN Treaty on Business and Human Rights. So if anyone is interested in more information about that, I'd be happy to speak afterwards. Thanks very much. I hope I kept to time.